All right, I think we can go ahead and get started, and I'll keep letting people in. It's so nice to see some of these familiar faces, some in the last few weeks. So thank you for joining us today. So good afternoon. I am Teresa Gage, Assistant Director of Alumni and Alumni Relations here at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And I welcome you to be with us today for a day on, not a day off, to honor Martin Luther King Jr. today on this special day, and to showcase this wonderful panel in front of us, some of our amazing Hobart and William Smith alums who are working in K-12 schools. Today, I welcome students and there's faculty and staff and our community. And so it's just an amazing event. Thank you. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping tips. Let's keep our microphones muted to limit our background noise, which we're all pretty seasoned on Zoom. It looks like everybody's doing that. It also would be helpful to keep us in a speaker view so that we can see each panelist when they're speaking. And we are going to do our best today to answer every question. I'll be watching the chat, so please use our chat feature. If we're not able to get to every question today, I can always connect you with one of our panelists, and we will do our best to answer everybody's questions. Today we have with us Assistant Principal Lawrence Moultrie, Hobart Class of '04, Special Education Teacher Lyndsey Ackerman, William Smith Class of '18. Graduate student Gavin Flood, Hobart Class of '20, MAT Class of '21. Guidance Counselor Shavonne Ward, William Smith Class of '09, and Special Education Teacher Meghan Guard, William Smith Class of '12, MAT 13. Moderating our event today is Associate Professor of Education and Department Chair, Professor Mary Kelly. Professor Kelly has been with us since 2007. Her educational focus is on special education and teacher training. So enough from me. I would like to turn this conversation over to our experts in the field, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Teresa and Chevy from the Office of Alumni Relations. I am so thrilled to be here today with our HWS alum and with everyone who's logged in. An amazing group here. What an esteemed gathering of many who have dedicated their lives to teaching and working with youth, or who are just starting off on their journey to learning how to be a teacher. Our panel today of experts provide different perspectives and insights from both new and experienced educators. These educators have worked in a variety of capacities as teachers, administrators, counselors, coaches, mentors, many in public school settings, as well as in other educational settings. Our discussion today will focus on 4 core areas: equity, student and family supports, creativity and resiliency, and self-care. We will also wrap up with comments about where we go to from here and some hope for the future. So let's get started. We felt that it was important to ground our conversation today in issues of equity. We've all seen the way in which the pandemic has heightened issues related to the lack of equity in education and unequal access across schools and communities. So we'll ask each of the panelists to comment about the barriers and challenges that have particularly impacted your students and schools at this time. We'll start with Lyndsey, who is teaching the furthest away from here in Texas. Hi, Lyndsey. It's good to see you again. Can you get us started?
Yeah, of course.
Great.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lyndsey Ackerman. I graduated from William Smith in 2018. In those years, I worked for Penn Yan Elementary School for 2 years as a special education teacher. And now I'm in Austin, Texas, like Mary said, very far away from most of you all in upstate, but it's been really great. This year, I'm also working as a special education teacher, which has been a very different experience from what I had in New York. But just to kind of speak to equity for a minute, the number one thing that pops out to me is community. I have been very fortunate to kind of be dropped into this community where all of these community members, parents, old teachers, grandparents have been able to kind of come together and build a really great network for our students so we can be as successful as possible. Now, with that being said, of course, there's barriers and different challenges that we may face. And as a special education teacher, I've noticed the different ways that the state is trying to kind of grapple with this discrepancy with how do we make sure our students have what they need while still trying to honor that they may need to be remote learners in order to best serve their physical needs or things like that. So there have been so many conversations around which I wish I had the perfect answers, but of course no one does. So just as a special education teacher, it's been really interesting to see how do we best serve our kids, whether they are in the classroom, in their living room, at their little pod where they have different students working together and things like that.
Thank you, Lyndsey, for getting us started. I'll go ahead and ask Lawrence. You bring expertise, both as a school administrator and a longtime social studies teachers. What observations would you like to share with us today?
Well, thank you guys for having me first off. One of the things that I've noticed over the course of the pandemic is issues with equity, things such as not having access. So let me first start this way. I worked in both urban and suburban schools during the course of this pandemic. And during this time period, I've seen issues that go from both urban and suburban schools. I've had issues with equity in terms of how many students have access to laptops, Chromebooks, MacBooks, iPads, whatever modality they're going to use to get onto the internet. So they can still have the opportunity to learn. Because one of the things in New York State is that we have to supply every student with a sound basic education. That looks very different for every student. That goes to the terms of equity. But one thing I need to let you know is that in suburban and urban areas, it's vastly different. The school I currently work in, every student has a laptop. The district did a great job over the last 10 years of supplying every student with a Chromebook. But in the urban school district that I worked in last school year, in the 17 years prior to that, we were sending students home when COVID hit in March with one laptop per household. And in certain instances, you could have anywhere from 1 to 9 students on that laptop or Chromebook that needed to figure out how they're going to learn and be able to learn to the best of their ability. Now the question comes in, were we providing them with a sound basic education? The school district argued that they were, to the best of their ability at the time. Now they have subsequently provided every student in the district with a one-to-one laptop. And then they went and purchased hotspots and things of that nature to make sure that every student had the opportunity to have that sound basic education throughout the school district. In addition to that, one of the last thing that I want to point out is we also had issues with students having problems receiving meals, because as you know, one of the things that students come to school, in the school district I formerly worked in, we provided not only breakfast, lunch, but then the kids would come for our after school program and we would provide them a snack. And in some instances, with some kids that were on a special program, we sent them home with a sandwich for dinner in some cases. So sometimes, in some cases, we were providing them with 4 meals a day. Now, how do you do that when you went from learning on a Friday to completely shut down and then rebuilding a system by Monday? It was a challenge. We did it. What I can tell you is it's better than it was in March, but it's still not perfect.
Lawrence, thank you. Shavonne, you were a longtime teacher down in the Mississippi Delta, and now you work as a guidance counselor up with Prep for Prep in New York City. There's perspectives that you have here. What are you noticing?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Siobhan Ward. I'm a 2009 proud William Smith graduate. And I see a lot of faces and I'm like, ooh, this is awesome. So after I left the colleges in 2009, I went right into Teach for America. So a week and a half after graduating, my assignment was the Mississippi Delta, specifically Arkansas. I was born and raised in the South Bronx, so it was a very interesting experience. I fell in love with my kids, community, and families 2 years, a 2-year assignment turned into 8 years for me. So I taught as a teacher. I was a middle school teacher at a charter school, KIP, which is a national charter, Knowledge is Power program. And I was also a dean at the middle school. In 2017, I relocated back to New York. And I started to get involved with the nonprofit scene. So City Year New York, where I trained core members to work with students that were behind in ELA and math skills in New York City public schools. And now I work for Prep for Prep, which is a program geared towards students of color in boarding schools and also private schools here in New York City. So I've really seen a gamut of a lot of different arenas. And I would say a huge issue around equity has really been the haves and have-nots. Many of us on here have experienced students not wanting to have on their Zoom screens and that being a battle. But there's a lot of insecurity around that. Many of my students are seeing their classmates, on the beach or taking a trip to the Bahamas, and you're in a 2-bedroom apartment with 6 other people and a baby screaming. So there's a lot of issues around that. And it's really given people a higher sense of empathy to understand where students and families are coming from. There's a term in education that we throw around a lot. And I think right now we're in a season of how do we apply it? So a lot of people talk about whole school, whole child. I would actually challenge that. And I would add another category of whole school, whole child, and hold home. There are issues within the home that students are having to navigate like never before, whether they are now a primary caregiver because parents are working all day, or going through issues of battling their parents who are going into hospitals every day to work. So there's a host of issues, and I feel that schools now cannot deny the essence of who students are coming to the school door. You have to talk about those things that are going on at home and have those conversations directly. I have families that have been seeking family counseling because it's been really hard these last few months. So people are tapping in like never before. I love that I'm seeing more families that were had a negative image of counseling really wanting to engage in those spaces. Lastly, in the words of one of my favorite writers, James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And whether, the landscape of education was prepared for this, we have to step on up and be prepared because our kids and families are depending on it. So I don't think it's about having the right answers, but I think it's about try again. So you might fall 7 times, but stand up 8 more times again and really be about this work because it is hard. And I do want to say a thank you to everyone that is on the line because it's hard work. It is not easy at all. So thank you for all that you all do.
Thank you, Siobhan. Thank you. Meghan, now you've taught students with autism in the Bronx, and now you're back here in the Finger Lakes teaching students with autism in a BOCES classroom. What are some of the issues that are most pressing to you?
So that's going to be a hard panelist to follow up afterwards. Siobhan, that was so well said. Everybody, that was so well said. I'm excited to be on part of this panel with such other great educators in the field. Like Mary said, I taught for 3 years in the Bronx in a District 75 setting after I graduated. And now I teach for Wayne Finger Lakes, BOCES, Mid-Lakes Education Center. We primarily have students with autism in our program. So my perspective and that special ed perspective is one of the challenges that we had was meeting our students' needs who did not have the skill set maybe to access remote learning. I was fortunate in our school that we have a person who's in charge of technology, which I did not have at the time when I taught in the Bronx. So technology was, at least from what I could tell, quickly distributed to students and families who needed that, which was great to see when we went remote in March. But so many of my students and students in our program more so learn through like pencil paper tasks, hands-on tasks, work tasks, and how do you replicate that, on the drop of a dime in a remote setting. So for some hope and positive, I think we worked hard. I saw teachers try to be creative last spring and either delivering materials to students' homes themselves, just tried to think, how can I creatively meet these children's needs? Since the fall, we've been back in person, and as of last Tuesday, now we're back remote, and depending on the cases, switching back and forth. And we've tried the best, myself and my colleagues, to prepare our kids a little better in terms of when they're in school, teaching them how to log on, or a lot of parent and family support. I think that's been another positive at times, because we're in their living rooms, supporting families to help them teach their children. It's been definitely a challenge in order to help support our kids to access that remote learning. But I think some positive is we've had some really creative, resilient colleagues that I've worked with. And I think some of that family support has been positive at times, since we're all home with them and they're home with their children, to help them. And so, yeah.
Megan, thank you. Yeah, a unique set of challenges there, and yet similar, isn't it? Gavin, you come to this conversation having just finished student teaching. So while less experienced, you had an experience unlike other student teachers this semester. You have a unique vantage point, both with your feet in higher education and secondary social studies ed. So what are some of the insights that you bring to the conversation today?
Sure. Thank you everyone for coming. As Mary said, I am a 2020 graduate and currently enrolled in the Masters of Arts in Teaching program, and spent this fall student teaching at Canandaigua Middle School, not too far from Geneva, in a 7th and 8th grade social studies classroom, which middle school, as some of you may know, presents its own unique set of challenges, and at a pandemic, and it was quite the ride. But I'm happy to say that 3 months later, my interest in entering the profession is unwavered. So I'm, if anything, I'm more excited to begin this journey as I begin looking for jobs at this moment. I think I went into this semester feeling fairly prepared. All of what I learned in the teacher education program and as an education major is really fresh, just having graduated in May. But certainly I was learning in the moment along with every other teacher in the building. I won't repeat what everyone else said, because I think all of us, no matter the district, no matter the demographics, we were all dealing with the technology challenges, the food insecurity. But I went into this semester knowing or realizing throughout the way that this diversity, equity, and inclusion work is part of this social emotional piece. That was the social emotional aspect of teaching was a huge buzzword over the summer going into this fall of pandemic classrooms. And I did my best as a social studies teacher, which presents its own challenges with how do we discuss history, especially the most ugly parts. And I think I really prioritize the relationships with kids. I think that once you've got a strong relationship with a student, that is going to have much more of an impact on making the truth apolitical or decolonize the curriculum than any kind of policy or curricular change might. These kids are sponges, no matter their age. TikTok, Instagram, the news, we are just faced with so much information, and I tried my best to make some of the truth really come out to them throughout this year, this unprecedented year in so many ways. But the election and the pandemic and the loss of a Supreme Court justice, all of that we tackled as middle schoolers and their teacher who's learning along the way.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm sure that those of us listening in on the comments tie a long historical context to inequality here. and inequity. And at the same time, we're also grappling with something unique here during the pandemic that presents some unique and new challenges. And Gavin, to pick up on what you were talking about that relationship with students, we'll ask Lawrence and Gavin to weigh in on how some of those relationships between schools and families have changed during this time. Essentially, is what students and families need from us, from educators, from schools, changed? In what ways? Lawrence, as an administrator, I know this is something that you're paying attention to every day, isn't it?
Yes. So one of the things I've noticed over this time, and like I said, I bring two different perspectives, both urban and suburban. And the thing that I've noticed is that, people have been more cognizant of trauma-informed care. Students are going through so much trauma. Depending on, you never know, as Shavonne said, you could be in a, 2-bedroom apartment with 9 people. You don't know what the situation is. And we didn't know this time this time in 19, we didn't know what they were going through. But we only had an idea. When it progressed to the point of the school knowing, then we did something about it. Now everything is seeming to lean towards being progressive and saying, how can we deal with this situation prior to? How can we do a lot of preventative measures? What can we do for the student? What can we do for the family? Like you said, Shavonne, the whole child, the whole family, how can we educate everybody? So what we're looking at is, putting more social workers into schools. I know it's been very, very steep budget cuts going through different districts throughout New York State. But one thing I have noticed is that people are trying to be more cognizant of what people are going through. Hey, I do different home visits. I can't tell you how many times I stop and my colleague stops at both school districts that I've worked at and picked up loaves of bread or toilet paper or whatever for families, trying to make sure that we are meeting their basic needs. We can't do this for everybody, but making sure that we're lending a hand to let people know that we care about them and care about their child and do the best that we can for them. So what I've seen over the course of the last 9-10 months is that it gives me hope. It's not perfect, but what I've seen is that people are willing to go the extra mile for people. They're building relationships. I've seen parents get back to administrators and teachers more frequently because of things of like Google Meets, so they don't have to come into school or they don't have to do whatever. They can get on a Zoom meeting. I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings I've had with parents. Some parents have told me I'm giving up, and then we've had a meeting and then said, this is the plan to get your child back on track. And it's a 5-10 minute meeting. And then sometimes they sit the kid into another room and then express different things to me or different ones of my colleagues. And we've had to do counseling sessions for parents right on the spot. It's the unintended consequences, but I will tell you, and I will always try to be a glass half full guy and say, there is hope, it's gonna get better, but at the same time, I know it's not perfect now. There's definitely a lot of relationships being built. And they're going to be relationships that go through generations, because people are going to see, they may have a student that's in 10th grade now, but that child, they're going to have siblings that are going to come up through the middle school, come up through different high schools and come to that school. And they're going to say, oh, Mr. Moultrie or Mr. X or Mrs. X helped me this time with your brother. And those relationships are going to go forward. So I'm going to wrap it up.
Thanks, Lawrence. I think it's interesting to hear where some of the opportunities are coming out of these challenges. Gavin, let's bring your voice in here. We have the person with the longest experience and the most newest experience here. What you talked about relationships with students. Is that where you're seeing, or are there other aspects that you'd like to comment on?
Yes, I think the need for relationships, whether they be over messaging families through the online learning management platforms or via email, or it be students savoring those 2 days in school if they're in a hybrid model. the relationships were imperative. And I think walking away from a semester of student teaching during this time, the importance of them, has never been so great. We still managed to hold clubs at the school at which I was student teaching. We still managed to hold the annual pumpkin walk, where students were able to carve pumpkins and put them in the bus loop for families to come drive through. Those little nuggets of normalcy, I think, was super important, and what families really needed. Aside from the Wi-Fi hotspot or the free lunch, or just the care that maybe their teachers can offer their kids when the parents can't, because they're working multiple jobs or have multiple kids in the home. All of those things, at least for me in the classroom, were put aside, and I just wanted to make sure that relationship was strong with them, whether it be helping with an after-school club or doing the pumpkin walk, or just doing a mental health check-in via a quick Google form. Sometimes the modality has to change in order for these kids to feel comfortable participating in this social emotional piece. And so we'll keep plugging away, trying to make sure that everyone's supported by the schools.
Thank you, Gavin. One of the things that stood out to me throughout this last year is how resilient and creative both teachers and students have had to be. And we'll loop in Meghan and Lyndsey on this one. Could you share some examples about how you strive to create new learning environments or solve problems that have come up in your work? It's coincidental that both of you are exceptionally talented and creative special education teachers answering this question. But I think the contrast is an interesting one to me. Meghan teaching in a self-contained classroom, Lyndsey working hard to create inclusion in your school. Meghan, you first.
So I think a lot of us who come to this field, naturally just possess these traits of being creative and being resilient. I think that's one of the reasons we're drawn to the profession. And I remember last summer, especially when all the rules were coming out at us of like, you have to have your kids 6 feet apart. No one can share materials. They have to wear masks. And I'm sitting here thinking like, it's tough for me to sometimes have my kids keep their clothes on all day, forget masks or some of the other just challenges that we already face. And then I thought back, at like what other problems have I encountered in my other years of teaching, and what strategies did I use, and how was I creative in problem solving, and certain things like, specific to special ed, social stories that help support kids, where they can take a break. And I created cozy dens under their desks. And I, came this fall, and, I think you can ask my husband who's on here. I was so surprised actually on how well some of my kids really did do with some of these strategies and some of these rules. And I think that also speaks to their resilience. They wore their masks. I wouldn't say great all day, every day, but they did a really good job. So I think some hope is that we all come into this profession, or most of us come in, I would say, with a deal of resiliency, and we are just creative problem solvers as teachers. And, it was a chance for our kids to really shine too.
Thanks, Meghan. Lyndsey, what are some of your perspectives on this?
First of all, I just want to echo everything Meghan said. Yes, times a million. Absolutely. I think all of us are just trying to figure out like, okay, how do we get our kids engaged when all we're looking through is a screen? And all those little videos that you see online or TikTok or Instagram, like that's us in the real world trying to figure out how do we get those kids engaged and wanting to learn with us. But at the end of the day, like Meghan said, our kids are really very, very resilient. They want to learn, they want to be there, maybe not every single day and every moment of every day, but they still want to be with you. They want to learn from you. And there's always a little part of them that's so curious, and they want to learn more about this. Like, this is our world. How do we make sure that we are living in this and growing and learning from it as well? And the other piece I just want to touch on is that connection with other educators and teachers. I moved to a new school this year in a new state, in a brand new curriculum and all 9 yards. And it was very challenging. I'm like, how do I find my footing? How do I make sure that I feel those connections with my other educators as well? But we are all here for the kids, and we're all trying to make sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel times 60 classrooms. We're trying to reinvent the wheel for one school, one district. And that being able to kind of lean into your co-teachers or your counselors or your administration and just know that they're backing you and supporting you and offering you any piece of advice or just an ear to listen to is one of the things that helps keep me grounded in all of this chaos. And just knowing that you are not alone at all, but trying to find connections, and just even if it's like, hey, we both love pizza, amazing, like let's go make sure that we're also treating ourselves outside of the classroom and outside of our world of education as well.
Lyndsey, what a nice connection to the next topic about this idea of community and connection. Teachers, I am honest and sincere when I say this, teachers and those who work with youth are some of the most amazing people that I know. They're always working, they're always planning, they're always striving to do right by the youth that they work with. And sometimes that means it's difficult to keep going, to keep the energy, to keep meeting our own internal expectations and high expectations that we set for ourselves and our work. Shavonne, you are one of those amazing, creative, inspiring educators to me. And you're doing phenomenal work out there. I wondered if you could talk with us for a couple minutes around some of the importance of self-care and how educators try to keep it together during these challenging times.
Yeah, self-care is definitely the word of 2020 and 2021. I've heard that word so much. And many times I'm like, what does that word even mean? Sometimes, and it changes day to day. You know, when I think about self-care, I think about taking a flight. And the first thing flight attendants, caution everyone to do in the safety protocol is to put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. Teachers, we are givers and we have no clue how to receive. It's the hardest thing to do. And it's even funny with teachers having vacation days, and I think a lot of times I laugh that they give it to us from a legal standpoint, but I remember teaching and feeling so concerned that I could not take a day off, that I would come coughing into school with tons of hand sanitizer just because I was concerned that my students wouldn't have their needs met. And the best lesson I've learned over these past 3 years since I've stepped out of the classroom is that taking a day off, and I don't like to call them sick days, I like to call them wellness days, because to be well and be at your best, you have to take care of you. The propensity of what happens when you don't take care of you, you're snippy, you're petty, you can't think properly. And taking a day for you means you will not be checking email. You are not taking phone calls. I've learned consistently over these last 3 years that taking a day off means that the school buildings are still there, the principal will still be there, the Zoom links are still there, and I can pick up within 24 hours. So I think it's so important that we support each other in this community of educators and advocates to take care of each other and to check in on one another too, not speaking about a kid, but just saying, hey, with a glass of wine or whatever your vice is, checking in with people too is so important as well. And I would say lastly, our kids need validation to see proper examples of self-care. So being transparent with your students, yes, I am taking a day off. And if you call me, I will not be returning your call till I return. Have those conversations with your kids. I think also right now, our kids are not looking for us to be strong. They're looking for us to be real. So it's okay to tell students, you know what? I had a hard day, or you know what, this person passed away. I think that, transparency is so key. Some of my best moments were times where I could really bare my heart to kids and they could see, wow, you're a real person. You're not this robot. So I think to be the best teacher you can be, an advocate, you have to bring your full self. This is not a therapy session with your kids, but you can let them know tidbits of what's going on. And when you don't let them know what's going on, they're going to make up their own story anyway of who you go out with or whatever the case might be. So that's my piece on self-care and wellness in this season.
Thank you, Shavonne. Important words of wisdom. We're going to have our last question here, and I just wanted to put a prompt out there that we are doing good on time because we wanted to create an opportunity to dialogue with you all. So we have been strict with ourselves. And so, this is a good time to start posting in a question in the chat. If you'd like to chat and engage with our panelists, we can circle back to one if you didn't hear from someone and we're curious how they would answer it, or if you have another insight or want to connect with some of your own experiences. I see some amazing educators in this group, so it would be great to hear from some of the things that you're connecting with too today. But I do want to end on this idea of hope. There's so much to be concerned about and so much work that needs to be done, and yet we persevere, we work, we continue forward. And yes, we have hope. We don't get into education unless we have hope. Most certainly. And as Dr. King described in his I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington, out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. And so I want to end with our last question, formal question, which is, when you look ahead and at the future of education, what gives you hope? We'll go with the same order at the beginning. So Lyndsey, can you get us started here?
Yes. So my philosophy on all of this is, when you're an educator, you're constantly thinking about all of your kids, right? You're thinking about how are they, what's happening, but you're also thinking about their progress. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in their academic progress. What is happening with their test grades? What's happening? Did they understand this math concept? What about this new reading skill? Like, are they grabbing onto it as best as you thought they could? But where I have to kind of pause my thinking on that and reframe is, are their hearts growing? Are their brains growing? Are they able to take a look at a math problem and come at it from a different angle? Are they able to help their friend that maybe tripped and fell on the playground? Are they able to help them up and, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about your knee, or whatever it may be, and get them the help that they need there? So yes, I want my kids to succeed academically, of course, but more importantly, that social emotional piece, I think, is really just taking the cake for all years, but especially for this year. And when I look back, when May comes around and it's our final day of school, I'll be reflecting on, how did they do? Are they okay? Are they walking out of my doors with a smiling face? Are they moving into the summers thinking like, I can't wait to read that book list that Miss Ackerman gave me, right? My biggest hope. But I just want to make sure that their hearts are still working and growing and watching all these different things that are happening and finding ways to relate to that. So my biggest feeling of hope is, are my kids okay? Are they learning and being in the way that I want them to?
Thank you, Lyndsey. Lawrence.
I want to make two quick points. When I was at Hobart and Smith, I took a class my junior or senior year called Making Connections. And the class Making Connections is, if I had to sum up my education, my educational career over the last 18 years, 17, 18 years, it would be building relationships with others to develop the good for others, right? You just, as an educator, you just keep constantly giving. And you want others to improve so that they can learn. But as a history teacher, one of my favorite quotes is from JFK. And it says, a child miseducated is a child lost. And if you really think about it, the importance of education nowadays, it's going to transform society. And I really believe that what's given me hope is the opportunities that we're starting to see. When I was at Hobart, I had a professor, Dr. Kerr, that said, as an educator, you have to be flexible. Well, now, because of COVID, it's making us transform the way we're teaching. So we're not just teaching to sit and write on the board, copy these notes, and it's just, rote memorization. What we're doing is teaching people how to learn for the 21st and the 22nd century. So that's what's given me hope, is the injection of technology finally into every single classroom. Although it was forced on us, so what? It's forced on us. Now we're going to use it and make our students in our lives even better. So, you have My mom's 63. She's doing things she had never did in her life. She's FaceTiming, she's Zooming, she's Google, she's Facebook messaging, phone calls. Impresses me. But it's because it was forced on us, but it doesn't matter. It's all the integration of technology. And that's what's given me hope, is that there's going to be some kid that's sitting in a class right now that, had this not happened, may not have had this opportunity that they're going to do. And they're going to create something that's going to substantially make my son's life better or somebody else's life better going forward. So that's what gives me hope.
Thank you, Lawrence. Shavonne.
Yes, so I love quoting people. You know, there's so many intelligent people in the world. And Stacey Abrams, I saw this quote from her recently, and she said, "I am not optimistic, not pessimistic, I am determined." And that is the state of education. We need to be determined, and we're showing it like never before, putting one foot in front of the next, not saying that we have the answers, but saying that we will not give up on our kids, we will not give up on our families, we will not give up on communities, and we're gonna do until we can't do anymore. So that's really what it's about. Also, Lyndsey, you said something so great about just social emotional development, and I love that. I was thinking about my executive director for our organization, and she was speaking to us as a staff and telling us, you know, we're tasked with such an important job of being able to imagine kids when they can't imagine themselves. There is a lot going on in the world today. Like, it is cloudy, it is funky, it is a hot mess. It's a whole lot of words that I have no words for. So it really is important that we try to be this beacon of light, not a savior complex, but a beacon of light to say, this is how we can proceed forward. These are options. There is hope. Continue to be hopeful as well. And I think, you know, the joy of what we do is that you can't laugh without crying within this profession. I've probably laughed and cried as much as I've done both. But it really inspires me. I look at my first group of kids that I taught in 5th grade in 2009 that are now going to be graduating from college. And it's really amazing being a part of their lives at this stage. So I encourage everyone, stick with it. Step aside when you need to. Step outside of the classroom. There's a lot of ways. I think teaching is one way, and I think once you step into the classroom, you never stop being a teacher. However, there's so many other ways to create change and make an impact. Teaching is not the only way. So I would encourage everyone, do while you can, and take care of yourself and take care of each other.
Thank you, Shavonne. Meghan.
Wow, that's all hard to follow up with. Those are so many really amazing points. So I guess all I wanted to say was, even though this past year has probably been maybe one of the biggest challenges education, you know, in this field has had to face, I think it's also brought to light some of the best of us. You know, it's really highlighted and given teachers the opportunity to really shine, which they always have, but, you know, just really even emphasized it more. And, you know, one beacon of hope, just even like I said, this past week of experience that I've had, we switched back to remote, and it's been kind of the theme all fall, in person, remote, depending on the cases. And I had one student whose family just either, you know, because of their work schedule, struggled to support remote learning, or they were nervous that he wouldn't be able to do it. And I worked with them and encouraged them and tried to problem solve with them. And last week he signed on every single day and he did a fantastic job. And, you know, so, you know, I think, like, don't look at the whole mountain, try to find the little victories. And that will push you, you know, all of a sudden it'll be June, and like has that feeling we all kind of have every year of, wow, look at how much we did accomplish. So try to use those small victories to get you through those days. And there's definitely a lot of hope.
Thank you, Meghan. Gavin.
So I'll just be short and sweet. I implore you all to think about a teacher you had in college or during your K-12 education, and that teacher is likely coming to mind because they played a really important role in your life. And whether you are a teacher or you have young neighbors or nieces and nephews or children of your own, it takes one caring, nurturing, excited adult to really carry a child through their most formative years in K-12 education. And I think about my own experience as a new teacher, a pre-service teacher, and this fall semester was kind of a test whether I would make it through and be able to say that I'm willing to enter this crazy field at this crazy time. And I really look to people that are on this panel and people that are on this call to really get me through that, and think about my own elementary, middle, and high school teachers as well. So think about that as you continue your roles in these children's lives.
Thank you all. It's just an honor to hear from all of you, and there is so much there in terms of from the beginning we started with community and social emotional learning. Shavonne, that call for the whole school, the whole child, the whole home, the whole community, and that responsibility I see connected with Gavin at the beginning and others who talked about social emotional learning and that individual child, to that health of the community, the health of the home, the health and well-being of society as a whole. And I think teachers are always balancing both of those, aren't we? That the health of individuals and the health of our classroom and the health of the community at the whole, that transformation and that flexibility. We have time for a few questions, and I see that there's a couple of comments coming in that we appreciate. And I will go ahead and put this question out there. The first one that came in was around from Laurel Warger. Laurel, did you want to talk about your comment, or do you want me to just read it?
Oh, you can just read it.
Okay. In what ways can students and teachers enhance their well-being together? And so that collaboration, could we hear from one or two of the panelists in response to Laurel's question?
Hi, so since I work with young elementary kiddos, I mean, we have dance parties almost every day. And I know that sounds so silly, but even just finding moments to celebrate with them and pause your classroom and kind of pause that learning, which you never really want to admit that you do, but pausing the learning to just say, friends, will you take a look at everything that you just accomplished? Like, will you look at these egg drop containers that you made to protect your eggs, and helping them notice and recognize when you should celebrate something? Because I think so often we're inclined to celebrate the big things like, ooh, you got an A on your test, or ooh, you did your homework 3 days in a row, or something like that. But if you help shape them and show them that even the smallest celebrations and smallest instances can be really celebrated together, then that will not only strengthen your community within your students, but also the community within your whole classroom. So finding and taking time to be silly and celebrate with them is really what I found to be the most successful, and they look forward to those little things all the time too. And there's also a variety of ways that you can celebrate kids. Is it a silent museum walk where they show all of their work and you leave a little compliment or a sticky note on each person's work? Or do you verbally talk with them? Or do you pause and you act something out or something like that? So just trying to be creative and, again, help them learn how to celebrate the small things and not always just stop and pause on the academic things.
I would also say, in addition to all the great examples Lyndsey said, and I hope you all were writing that down. I was like, yes, to the Silent Walk Museum. That's awesome. But birthdays, you know, I feel like that's something that people slip up on. I think that's something to acknowledge. Number one, get kids' names right. You know, call them by their name or their nickname. You know, find that affinity of touch points with them. So much we get consumed by standardized testing. And I think we really need to see our kids as people. You know, I've had 12th grade students turn into silly putty over a card, a birthday card. So just to acknowledge, like, I see you, it's your birthday, I'm taking time out of my day. I think there's so many creative ways to do that, just to say happy birthday. And we don't know what birthdays look like for kids. It might be a special day, it might be a trauma-filled day. So just to have someone acknowledge, like, wow, you knew my birthday, means a lot in so many different ways too.
Thank you both, Lyndsey and Siobhan. That was a good question. I'm going to build on that. We had a couple questions come in about the uniqueness of remote learning. One that was public, one that was private around the supports for parents at home. Teachers are finding it difficult to fill a day with remote learning. How can parents support learning at home? And then we also had a question from Bailey around Zoom fatigue. And tutors who are working with students was the specific example that Bailey brought up. But there's a lot of Zoom going on and a lot of remote learning. And so I wondered if a couple panelists could either look at that parent perspective around Zoom or bring in that student perspective around, what do you do about Zoom? Yeah, Lawrence.
So one of the things I would recommend for people is that, remember the traditional school day is no more. You have the school day going from whatever it was, 8 to 3 or 7:45 to 2:45, whatever it is not what it used to be. I know that we give students, similar to when I was at Hobart and when I was doing my master's degrees, we give it at midnight to get your work in now. So what I would say is stop, give the students the option. I know teachers are live streaming their classes, recording them, and telling the kids that I will mark you present as long as you go back and fill out the entrance ticket or the exit ticket, and you're giving you're showing me that you did the assessment for today, so that I can give you credit for it. You know, is that more of a high school level thing? Yes, it is. You know, I can't speak to the elementary right at this moment, but I will tell you that I know middle school teachers and high school teachers are doing that and saying, because of the fact that there is inequity in terms of availability of Chromebooks and things of that nature, is a way to get on. So we're saying, as long as you get on in this 24-hour period or between this class and the next class and show me that you had an understanding of the learning, I will support you and say that you were here for the day and give you credit for attendance. In terms of everybody else, in terms of parents, my advice to you is to let them know that it does not have to all be completed at one time. And as to teachers, I know in my school district, we're asking you to teach the essentials of learning. So we're going to the sound basic education. I hate the idea when people say that we're dumbing it down, but we're trying to get the most critical points of social studies, math, science, and English to the kids, so they have the basic education, so they know that these are the fundamentals of education, and they need to move on from there. So I would also encourage you to look at your curriculum and maybe tailor it back from what you have done in years past.
And I think from that elementary perspective, and granted, I know I'm in the special ed field, but I feel like that creativity piece comes into play. So similar to what Lawrence was saying, like, right, it's not your 8 to 2, we're going from centers to gym to art. A lot of teachers in my school, we tried to create choice boards to try to provide that flexibility to kids and parents. So I can give your kid credit for attendance if they do one of these 5 options today. And all of those options will, deliver the instruction that I want them to get, but just depending on, the child's needs or the family's needs. So luckily, I think, like I said, we are a field filled of very creative professionals. And I think that was something that a lot of teachers took a step back and were like, right, like Lauren said, how can I deliver this in a way that's accessible to our kids and these families?
I'm going to go ahead and bring in Kayla's question here. Kayla asked, what advice might you give to new students, prospective students, new educators, prospective educators, these teachers who are, I see a lot of folks who are coming out, who are on the line, who are in a teacher education program or studying education. What wisdom do you have for them? Complicated times.
So I'm actually starting a leadership program for my administrative, and I feel it may be in a similar position in that, wow, this looks very daunting. But actually at our welcome meeting last week, the guest speaker gave a really good quote, and he said, "If not you, then who?" So this is a really important job, where we're shaping and trying to make the future better. So if not you, then who? So even though it might be, scary and daunting, have that confidence within yourself that you're going to make mistakes, but you're going to go out the next day and try your best again. And that, like Lyndsey said, you're in a field with a lot of other really caring and passionate people, and they're going to help you through.
I will go as the newest member of the field from this group. I think that obviously I haven't studied anything else but what I've done here at HWS, but from my own little bit of research, there are very few other majors, areas of study that provide you with such great hands-on experience. And this is not just an HWS specific trait. And so I think that really taking that time you have in your classroom as a student teacher or as an observer of a classroom, or even as a summer camp counselor, because that's when you'll really know when you connect with a certain kid or when you have a lesson that goes really well. I also would say that many of us in this profession are perfectionists. We can call ourselves super flexible all we want, but a lot of us are really excited when things line up perfectly and everything goes well, and be ready for that not to happen all the time, especially in your first few years. Good luck, Kayla.
Mary, can I say one more thing, Professor Kelly? I wanted to say, being an advocate, a teacher, an educational leader, it's so important that you are reading yourself. I know it's hard to do between reading of papers and parent conferences, but even commit to a strategy that you're learning once a month. I liken what we do to being doctors in our field. I would detest strongly going to a doctor that I know that has not gone to any conferences, has not renewed their license in 20 years. That is scary. I don't know how I might come out of the operation room. So it's really important that we keep our finger on the pulse with what's going on. And it might be a conversation with a colleague. If you can't commit to reading, even maybe share dialogue. Maybe you gather with 3 or 4 other teachers once a month at your school and you all just exchange strategies. But I think it's so important to not isolate yourself in this world of teaching, but tap in to know what's going on as well. Do not become stagnant. You always want to be dynamic in what you're doing.
One of the things the advice that I would give somebody going into the profession of education is to know your why. Know why you're doing this. Because over the course of your career, your why will always come to question, why are you doing this? What I would another piece of advice I would tell you is that always remember that any decision, if you go from a teacher or wherever role that you take place, that you embark on, I would say that make sure you're making every decision for the good of students. Every day I make sure that, I look at decisions that I have to make and I try to make sure that I'm making them for the good of students. Faculty and staff and parents may not always agree with them, but I always try to make sure that I have a core representation of people that are around me so they know why I made the decision. But I always come back to, is this in the best interests of the masses of our students? So know your why, make sure you're doing your work for the good of the masses, the good of the students, and make sure that you're just being true to yourself. And as Shavonne said before, make sure you're getting self-time. I don't care if you go for a 30-minute walk or if you do meditation and yoga, whatever it is, make sure every day that you're taking time for yourself, because you're only good as you can only be good to others if you can be good to yourself.
Lawrence, thank you so much. I think what I've learned today is that I want to be 12 years old again and have each of you as one of my teachers. Today, your discussion was so inspiring. And Professor Kelly, I think you have a lot for these students that you had in the classroom. You have a lot to be proud of. I actually really do have chills sitting here because I'm just pleased at everything you all have to say. And I cannot thank you enough for joining us. And everybody on the call today, please reach out if you do have any other questions. I can put you in touch with any of these panelists. And take a look at some of the resources that they've gathered for you that Professor Kelly did put in our chat. And for those of you that need those continuing education credits, be sure to get credit for that today. Mary or Professor Kelly, I don't know if you have anything else that you need to say, but from the Office of Alumni and Alumni Relations, I want to thank all of you for being here with us. And again, you are all doing amazing things in your field.
If folks want on, thank you, Teresa and Chevy, so much for hosting this panel. It was a fantastic idea, and I think this conversation can continue on and on. Chevy had a great idea.
Only scratched the surface.
I know, it was just the beginning. Chevy had a great idea. Could everyone unmute for a second? And let's give these amazing panelists some props, snaps, claps, or thumbs up, or give them an emoji.
Thank you.
What a beautiful day. I could not imagine spending any other better way to have a day on and not a day off. But with this esteemed group of panelists and participants, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.